Check his right pocket, 3 words from a child that exposed a surveillance device broadcasting Wesley's sister's wedding to enemies who wage war with data instead of guns. The contractor wasn't there to kill anyone. He was there to do something far more terrifying. Transmit every alliance, every financial discussion, every vulnerability to the Meridian Collective, an organization that turns your own secrets into weapons. What Wesley's team found sewn into that tuxedo was professional-grade espionage equipment, and what they learned during interrogation proved his enemies had evolved beyond anything street-level security could stop. The ballroom gleamed with champagne towers and ivory lace, and Wesley Cade stood close enough to the newlyweds' receiving line to project familial warmth, but kept his attention scanning the crowd's subtle tells instead. His sister's face glowed with genuine happiness, which felt like a dangerous vulnerability in a world where joy attracted predators like blood and water. The historic venue smelled of gardenias and old wealth, that particular combination of fresh florals and aged mahogany that only existed in establishments serving families whose fortunes had questionable origins. Lorraine adjusted the emerald ribbon on Juniper's dress with gentle fingers, a nervous gesture that had nothing to do with the child's appearance, and everything to do with keeping her own hands occupied during what was essentially a high-stakes surveillance operation disguised as a celebration. The little girl stood perfectly still during these adjustments, her dark eyes tracking the room with an intensity that seemed wrong for someone who should still believe weddings were about romance rather than tactical positioning. She'd been pulled from a collapsing foster situation 8 months earlier, in circumstances that remained carefully unspoken, and Lorraine had stepped into the role of primary guardian without hesitation or formal paperwork. Wesley's position as ward overseer was more strategic than paternal Juniper's almost supernatural ability to read micro-expressions and track objects had proven invaluable during a recent territorial dispute, but the arrangement worked because all 3 understood the unspoken rules of transactional protection. Wesley's toast drew careful lines around sentiment, praising his sister's courage and vision, while omitting the territories her new husband controlled and the rivals who'd been strategically excluded from the guest list. The attendees understood this verbal choreography, raising glasses at appropriate moments while their eyes communicated what their mouths never would. Business associates stood shoulder to shoulder with legitimate society figures who'd learned not to ask questions about the source of capital funding the lavish reception. The mixture of worlds created a tension that hummed beneath the surface of orchestrated joy, a frequency only certain people could detect. Juniper watched a man in the 3rd row adjust his cufflinks with unnecessary precision, noting how the gesture was less about appearance and more about checking something concealed. She'd developed this habit of cataloging micro-movements in the months since Wesley had taken her in, tracking details that adults missed because they were too busy performing normalcy rather than maintaining vigilance. Lorraine had taught her that watching carefully could prevent hurt, that understanding who people really were through their smallest actions offered better protection than any bodyguard's physical presence. The ballroom held 73 guests by Juniper's count, though she'd only been formally introduced to 16 of them by name and function. Wesley's inner circle formed a protective constellation throughout the space, men and women whose designer formal wear couldn't quite hide the tactical awareness of trained operators. Their placement suggested this wedding was also a strategic gathering, an event where alliances would be tested and loyalties confirmed through the simple act of attendance during a vulnerable family moment. Lorraine's hand rested lightly on Juniper's shoulder, a touch that grounded without constraining, and the child leaned into that warmth while maintaining her surveillance of the crowd's behavioral patterns. She'd learned that safety came from knowing what was happening before it fully unfolded, from catching the tremor of intention before the earthquake of action arrived. The guardian and the guarded had developed their own language over 8 months of shared hypervigilance and careful boundary setting. Lorraine provided the emotional stability that allowed Juniper to function without constant fight or flight activation, while Juniper provided the observational intelligence that kept them both safer in Wesley's dangerous world. The venue itself was a monument to controlled elegance, its limestone facade hiding ballrooms where powerful families had celebrated and negotiated for over a century. Thick carpets absorbed footsteps and muffled conversations, creating acoustic privacy even in crowded spaces. Oil paintings of the building's founding patrons lined the hallways, their stern faces suggesting they'd hosted events where joy and danger coexisted just as precariously. Juniper found those portraits less unsettling than some of the real faces around her, because at least painted expressions remained consistent and predictable across repeated observation. Wesley's posture carried the weight of authority even when softened by familial affection, each movement chosen to project strength rather than the vulnerability that family celebrations naturally created. He spoke briefly during the formal toasts about his sister's dedication to family, using that loaded term that meant both blood relations and the extended network of loyalty and strategic alliance. The men and women positioned near the exits shifted their weight almost imperceptibly, recognizing the subtext that promised protective continuity and warned against opportunistic moves during this moment of assumed distraction. This celebration of union was also a demonstration of surveillance capability. Juniper noticed how certain guests avoided lingering near Wesley's inner circle, while others approached with calculated casualness before retreating after brief exchanges. These small interactions formed a map of power and submission that she was learning to read with increasing precision. Lorraine had never explicitly taught her these skills, but the child absorbed them through proximity to a woman who'd survived dangerous situations by understanding unspoken hierarchies and invisible boundaries. The reception was less about honoring love than establishing terms for the organization's stability during transitional vulnerability. The climate control hummed with expensive efficiency, maintaining a temperature that preserved elaborate floral arrangements and guest comfort, while doing nothing to dispel the tension that celebration and vigilance created together. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city's glittering skyline, a view that suggested dominance and exposure in equal measure. A jazz quartet played standards in an alcove, the music audible but not intrusive, providing emotional texture without demanding attention or interfering with the multiple quiet conversations happening simultaneously throughout the space. Every detail had been orchestrated to project both joy and control, the dual messages that Wesley's organization could celebrate family milestones while maintaining absolute operational security. The champagne was French and expensive, the catering impeccable, the guest list curated with strategic precision. This was protection through visibility, safety through calculated exposure in a controlled environment designed to draw out threats rather than hide from them. Juniper's attention locked onto a man entering through the south entrance late enough to avoid the formal receiving line, but not so late as to seem deliberately disruptive. She recognized him instantly from the briefing materials Wesley had shown her last week. Donovan Cross, known professionally as the Contractor, a man who existed in the gray space between organizations, providing specialized services to whoever paid his substantial fees. His presence at this private family event was a calculated violation, an uninvited intrusion that suggested either tremendous confidence or complete desperation. The Contractor moved through the crowd with the practiced ease of someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere, his charcoal tuxedo tailored to perfection, his movements economical and purposeful. He avoided Wesley's visible security team with subtle course corrections, navigating toward the newlyweds' table through gaps in the crowd's natural flow. Juniper's eyes narrowed as she tracked his approach, noting the micro-adjustments in his posture, the way his right hand kept drifting toward his jacket's interior pocket before catching himself and redirecting the gesture. Lorraine felt the child's tension through their physical connection and leaned down slightly. "What do you see?" "Wrong guest," Juniper whispered, her voice barely audible beneath the quartet's rendition of "The Way You Look Tonight." "The man in dark gray. Wesley showed me his photo. He's not supposed to be here." Lorraine's hand tightened fractionally on Juniper's shoulder, acknowledgement without alarm. She made eye contact with Wesley across the ballroom, a brief glance that communicated warning without disrupting the celebration's surface calm. Wesley's expression didn't change, but his posture shifted almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring by millimeters, weight distribution adjusting for potential rapid movement. The Contractor reached the edge of the newlyweds' table and waited with exaggerated patience for an appropriate moment to offer congratulations. When Wesley's sister finally acknowledged him with polite confusion, clearly not recognizing him from the approved guest list, the Contractor leaned in with practiced charm, his words too quiet for Juniper to hear across the distance and ambient noise. But Juniper wasn't listening to his words. She was watching his hands. As the Contractor straightened from his congratulatory lean, his right hand moved to his jacket's lapel in what should have been a casual adjustment of formal wear. But the movement was wrong, too deliberate, too specific, accompanied by a micro-expression of concentration that suggested he was confirming something rather than correcting appearance. His fingers grazed the interior pocket lining for half a second, and in that brief moment, Juniper caught it. The hyper-brief flash of chrome and circuitry, a glint of sophisticated technology sewn into the tuxedo's interior structure. Not a weapon, something else. Something that required checking, confirming, adjusting. The music swelled as the quartet transitioned into a more energetic piece, couples beginning to move toward the dance floor in response to the newlyweds' first dance. The ambient noise level rose with laughter and conversation, and clinking crystal, providing acoustic cover that hadn't existed moments earlier. Juniper made her decision. She pulled away from Lorraine's steadying hand and moved through the crowd with the easy invisibility of a child at an adult gathering, her small frame weaving between formal wear and champagne-holding guests. She reached Wesley's side just as the contractor began to turn away from the newlyweds' table, clearly intending to circulate through the reception now that his conspicuous arrival had been completed. Juniper grabbed Wesley's hand with enough force to command immediate attention, without creating visible alarm. He looked down, his expression shifting from host-appropriate warmth to sharp focus, as he recognized genuine urgency in her body language, rather than childish need for attention. The jazz quartet hit a crescendo that temporarily drowned out nearby conversations. Juniper stood on her toes, pulling Wesley's ear within range, and whispered 3 words with absolute certainty. "Check his right pocket." Wesley's eyes found the contractor across the ballroom, tracking the man's casual circulation toward the exit nearest the parking area. His jaw tightened fractionally, the only visible tell that Juniper's warning had landed with devastating clarity. "You're sure?" Wesley's voice was barely audible, pitched beneath the music and celebration. Juniper nodded once, sharp and absolute. Chrome device, sewn into the lining. He checked it when he adjusted his jacket. Active transmission, he was confirming the signal. Not hiding evidence. Wesley's hand moved to his jacket pocket, extracting his phone with practiced casualness as though checking a message during his sister's reception. His thumb moved across the screen in a pattern Juniper recognized from previous high-stakes situations. The silent emergency protocol that would activate his security team without visible alarm or disruption to the celebration's surface normalcy. 2 men in impeccable formal wear detached from their positions near the ballroom's north and south entrances, their movement coordinated with the kind of synchronized precision that came from extensive training and clear prior instruction. They converged on the contractor's trajectory with deceptive ease, their approach timed to intercept him just as he reached the hallway leading to the exits. The contractor's expression flickered a microsecond of recognition, followed by careful recalibration into polite confusion as the security operatives materialized at his elbows. One of them spoke quietly, his words inaudible to the surrounding guests, but his body language suggesting a courteous request rather than confrontational detainment. "Mr. Cross, Mr. Cade requests a brief private word regarding a business opportunity. If you'd be willing to spare a few moments?" The operative's hand gestured toward a side corridor, the movement suggesting invitation while his positioning made clear that refusal wasn't actually an option. The contractor's smile remained perfectly calibrated as he nodded agreement, his performance of cooperative curiosity flawless to anyone not trained to read the tension in his shoulders or the calculation happening behind his eyes. He allowed himself to be guided toward the private room that Wesley's advance team had prepared for exactly this kind of contingency, a soundproofed space equipped with detection technology and physical security that could transform from interview location to holding cell within seconds. Juniper watched the extraction happen with the satisfied focus of someone whose observational accuracy had just been validated under high-stakes conditions. Lorraine appeared at her side, her presence grounding as the child processed the adrenaline spike that came from identifying threats and taking decisive action. "What did you see?" Lorraine asked quietly, her hand returning to Juniper's shoulder. "Transmitter," Juniper said simply. Hidden in his pocket lining, he was broadcasting everything: the conversations, the guest list, probably even spatial positioning for later tactical planning. Not here for violence, here for intelligence. Lorraine's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Juniper to fully catalog: alarm, pride, concern, and something that might have been grief for a child who'd learned to spot sophisticated surveillance equipment at formal celebrations. But when she spoke, her voice carried only calm acknowledgement. "You did exactly right," telling Wesley immediately, in a way that didn't create panic or disrupt the event. "That's how you keep people safe, June, not by being the loudest voice, but by being the most accurate one at the critical moment." Juniper leaned into Lorraine's side, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability now that the immediate threat had been contained. Around them, the wedding reception continued with champagne and laughter and the jazz quartet's sophisticated soundtrack, none of the guests aware that they'd just witnessed a masterclass in modern surveillance detection and rapid security response. Wesley caught Juniper's eye across the ballroom and gave her a single, slight nod acknowledgement that carried more weight than any verbal praise could have conveyed. Then he turned and walked with measured calm toward the interrogation room where the contractor was about to discover that sophisticated technology couldn't save you from being in a room with people who understood exactly what you'd done and why it was unforgivable. The celebration continued around them, a carefully maintained surface of joy and familial connection, while underneath, the real work of Wesley's world proceeded with lethal efficiency. Juniper had just proven that the most terrifying threats in the modern era weren't the ones you could see coming with guns drawn. They were the ones that walked in wearing tuxedos, smiling politely, broadcasting your secrets to enemies who'd weaponize your own words against you. And the only defense against that kind of warfare was someone capable of seeing what everyone else missed. Someone like an 8-month ward, with trauma-honed observational skills, and the courage to whisper truth to power at exactly the right moment. 3 words that changed everything. Check his right pocket. What they'd uncover would prove far more terrifying than anyone at that wedding reception could have imagined. But Juniper had seen it first, and that made all the difference. Wesley raised his champagne flute, with the practiced ease of a man who'd delivered 100 toasts while calculating 1,000 threats, his voice carrying across the ballroom with warmth that masked absolute control. To my sister and her new husband, may your partnership be built on trust that never wavers, and strength that never falters. The guests responded with appropriate enthusiasm, crystal chiming against crystal in orchestrated celebration, but Juniper caught the subtext beneath Wesley's carefully chosen words. Trust that never wavers, strength that never falters. These weren't romantic sentiments, they were operational requirements. A reminder to everyone present that this moment of familial vulnerability didn't signal organizational weakness. The applause rippled through the crowd as Wesley's sister embraced him with genuine affection, her happiness so authentic it made Juniper's chest tighten with something between envy and protective concern. Lorraine's hand squeezed her shoulder gently, reading the child's tension through their physical connection, providing grounding without drawing attention. Around them, the guests held their smiles with varying degrees of naturalness, and Juniper catalogued each one with the methodical precision she'd developed over 8 months of learning to survive through observation. The man in the navy suit near the west column smiled with his mouth but not his eyes, the disconnect suggesting performance rather than genuine pleasure. The woman in emerald silk by the champagne tower laughed too loudly at something that wasn't particularly funny, her overcompensation marking anxiety or calculation. 3 men clustered near the north entrance maintained expressions of polite interest, while their body language suggested they were mid-negotiation, using the celebration's noise as cover for sensitive discussion. Juniper had learned that weddings in Wesley's world functioned as neutral ground for conversations that couldn't happen in traditional business settings, and she'd become expert at identifying which guests were actually celebrating versus which were conducting transactions disguised as social interaction. Wesley returned to his position near the newlyweds' table, his posture relaxed but his eyes never stopping their systematic scan of the ballroom's various sectors. Juniper had watched him operate long enough to recognize the pattern. 3-second assessment of each quadrant, noting changes in grouping or positioning, identifying who was talking to whom and whether those conversations matched expected alliances. He was running surveillance software in his head, constantly updating threat matrices based on behavioral data that most people would dismiss as insignificant. The toast had served its secondary purpose beyond familial obligation. It had forced everyone in the room to stop, look toward Wesley, and reveal themselves through their reactions. Juniper had watched faces carefully during his carefully constructed message about unwavering trust and unfaltering strength, noting who nodded with genuine agreement versus who maintained careful neutrality versus who betrayed micro-expressions of resentment or calculation. The man in the gray suit near the south entrance had revealed the most interesting response, a flash of something cold and assessing before his features settled back into appropriate celebration, suggesting he'd recognized the warning embedded in Wesley's words and was calculating how it affected whatever agenda he'd brought to this event. Lorraine leaned down to whisper near Juniper's ear, her voice pitched beneath the ambient celebration. "You're counting again. How many showed genuine versus performed happiness?" 23 genuine, 41 performed. 9. Calculating, Juniper replied without hesitation, her assessment based on micro-expressions, pupil dilation, and the authenticity of smile lines versus forced facial positioning. The calculated ones are watching Wesley more than the bride. They're here for business. Good eye, Lorraine confirmed quietly. Remember, the ones who are obviously calculating are less dangerous than the ones who hide it perfectly. Keep watching for the smile that's too perfect, the attention that never wavers, the guest who seems more interested in blending than celebrating. Juniper nodded, her dark eyes resuming their systematic surveillance of the ballroom's emotional landscape, cataloging the difference between genuine joy and strategic performance, between celebration and camouflage. The toast was over, but the real work of reading this room full of dangerous people wearing formal wear and false faces had only just begun. The contractor entered through the south entrance at 8:47 p.m., late enough to avoid the formal receiving line but not so late as to suggest deliberate rudeness. Juniper's attention locked onto him instantly, recognition firing from the briefing materials Wesley had shown her during their security preparation sessions. Donovan Cross, known professionally as the Contractor, a man who existed in the gray spaces between organizations, providing specialized services to whoever met his substantial fees and ethical flexibility. His presence at this private family celebration was a calculated violation that suggested either tremendous desperation or complete confidence in his ability to navigate hostile territory. The Contractor moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his charcoal tuxedo tailored to perfection, his movements economical and purposeful in ways that marked professional training. Juniper tracked his trajectory across the ballroom, noting how he avoided Wesley's visible security positions through subtle course corrections that suggested either advanced reconnaissance or exceptional situational awareness. He didn't approach from the direct path that would have taken him, past the two operatives stationed near the champagne tower instead. He wove through clusters of guests, engaged in conversation, using their bodies as natural screening while maintaining the casual appearance of someone simply circulating through a crowded reception. Lorraine felt Juniper's body go rigid and followed the child's line of sight to the Contractor's approaching figure. Her hand tightened fractionally on Juniper's shoulder, acknowledgement of threat identification, without visible alarm that might alert surrounding guests. She made brief eye contact with Wesley across the ballroom, a glance that lasted less than a second but communicated volumes through their established system of nonverbal warnings. Wesley's posture shifted almost imperceptibly, weight distribution adjusting for potential rapid movement, his champagne flute lowering to the table beside him with deceptive casualness that freed both hands for tactical response. The Contractor's approach avoided all established security protocols that legitimate guests would have triggered: no check-in at the entrance desk where names were verified against the approved list, no interaction with the coat check where personal items would have been screened, no pausing at the gift table where arrivals typically deposited envelopes or packages that provided natural opportunity for secondary screening. He'd entered as though he belonged completely, his confidence suggesting either invitation from someone with authority to bypass normal procedures or brazen infiltration that relied on social engineering rather than technical circumvention. Juniper's eyes narrowed as she catalogued the Contractor's micro-expressions and behavioral tells. His smile was calibrated perfectly warm enough to suggest friendly intent but not so effusive as to seem performative or false. His pace through the crowd was neither rushed nor dawdling, hitting the exact tempo of someone comfortable in formal social settings but with specific destination rather than aimless circulation. His hands remained visible and relaxed at his sides, no nervous gestures or unnecessary movements that might draw security attention or suggest concealed weapons. Everything about his presentation suggested careful preparation and professional execution of infiltration tradecraft, but Juniper caught the tells that most people would miss. The microsecond pause when the Contractor's eyes swept across Wesley's position, calculating approach vectors and potential exit routes before settling on his chosen path. The slight tension in his shoulders that suggested hyper-awareness beneath casual confidence. The way his right hand kept drifting toward his jacket's interior pocket, before catching the impulse and redirecting to more neutral positioning, adjusting a cufflink, straightening his bow tie, brushing away imaginary lint. That repetitive gesture toward the right pocket was what locked Juniper's attention completely. Her instincts honed through 8 months of survival-based observation, telling her that whatever the Contractor was checking had nothing to do with appearance, and everything to do with mission confirmation. The Contractor reached the edge of the newlyweds' table and waited with exaggerated patience for an appropriate moment to offer congratulations, his body language suggesting respectful deference to the happy couple's current conversation with other well-wishers. But Juniper noticed how his eyes weren't focused on the bride and groom they were tracking, the security personnel positioned throughout the ballroom, mapping their locations and attention vectors with the systematic precision of someone planning multiple contingency exits. Wesley's sister finally acknowledged the Contractor with polite confusion, clearly not recognizing him from the approved guest list but too gracious to challenge an apparent guest at her own celebration. The Contractor leaned in with practiced charm, his words too quiet for Juniper to hear across the distance and ambient celebration, but his body language suggesting warm congratulations and perhaps apology for arriving late to such a special occasion. Juniper's hands curled into fists at her sides, her entire body vibrating with the certainty that this uninvited presence represented threat that hadn't yet fully materialized but was inevitable as gravity. Lorraine felt the tension and leaned down to whisper, "What do you see?" "Wrong," Juniper said simply, her voice tight with focus. "Everything about him is wrong. He's not here for celebration. He's here for something else." The Contractor straightened from his congratulatory lean toward the newlyweds, his smile maintaining perfect calibration as Wesley's sister thanked him with confused politeness and redirected her attention to the next well-wisher in line. For most observers, the interaction would have appeared completely normal, brief, cordial, appropriate to the social context. But Juniper's eyes never left the contractor's hands as he stepped back from the table, and in that moment of transition from focused social interaction to resumed circulation, she saw it. His right hand moved to his jacket's lapel in what should have been a casual adjustment of formal wear, the kind of unconscious grooming gesture people made constantly at elegant events. But the movement was fractionally too deliberate, too precise, accompanied by a micro-expression of concentration that suggested he was confirming something rather than correcting appearance. His fingers grazed the interior of his right pocket for perhaps half a second, not long enough to retrieve anything, not quite the motion of replacing something, but the specific touch of someone checking that an object remained positioned correctly. In that hyper-brief moment, Juniper caught the glint, chrome and circuitry, a flash of sophisticated technology sewn into the tuxedo's interior lining. Not the dull reflection of a phone or the matte surface of a wallet, but the distinctive gleam of polished metal and the geometric precision of electronic components. The device was small, no larger than a domino, but the care with which the contractor confirmed its positioning suggested it was active and mission-critical rather than dormant equipment he happened to be carrying. Juniper's breath caught as her brain processed what she'd seen and calculated probabilities based on Wesley's security briefings about modern surveillance technology. Not a weapon the size and shape were wrong, and the contractor's body language showed none of the heightened alertness that came from carrying lethal tools into hostile territory. Not a recording device in passive mode, those didn't require checking with the frequency she'd observed in the contractor's repeated pocket adjustments. This was an active transmitter, something broadcasting in real time, something that needed periodic confirmation of continued operation. The realization hit with devastating clarity. The contractor wasn't here to gather intelligence for later analysis. He was here to stream the entire event conversations, guest identities, spatial relationships, everything to whoever was receiving the signal. Every word spoken at this reception, every quiet business negotiation conducted beneath the cover of celebration, every guest's presence confirming their loyalty to Wesley's organization, all of it was being broadcast to enemies who would weaponize that information with surgical precision. Juniper's eyes tracked the contractor as he began moving toward the ballroom's periphery, his circulation pattern suggesting he was preparing to establish position near the bar area, where acoustics and proximity would capture multiple conversations simultaneously. The sophistication of his infiltration became clearer with this understanding. He hadn't come to participate in the celebration, or even to gather specific intelligence through directed conversation. He'd come to transform himself into a human surveillance device, broadcasting everything within range, while maintaining the social camouflage of an ordinary guest, enjoying champagne and small talk. The jazz quartet transitioned into a more energetic piece, couples beginning to respond to the newlyweds' invitation for others to join them on the dance floor. The ambient noise level rose with movement and laughter and increased conversation volume as guests competed with the music. The acoustic chaos that resulted would provide perfect cover for sensitive discussions, and perfect cover for Juniper to communicate her discovery to Wesley, without every nearby guest overhearing the security breach. But first she needed to be absolutely certain. Her eyes locked onto the contractor's right side as he paused near a column, ostensibly watching the dancing with the benign interest of a wedding guest appreciating the celebration. His right hand drifted toward that pocket again, the third time Juniper had observed the gesture in less than 2 minutes. This time she was positioned at a slightly different angle, and when his fingers grazed the interior lining, she caught more detail. The distinctive shape of a miniaturized microphone head, the gleam of antenna wire threaded through the tuxedo's construction, the telltale indicator light visible only from specific angles showing active transmission status. Confirmation solidified into certainty. The contractor was wearing a sophisticated surveillance device, custom integrated into his formal wear, actively broadcasting every sound within its range to recipients unknown. This wasn't opportunistic intelligence gathering, this was professional-grade information warfare, the kind of operation that required significant funding, technical expertise, and calculated timing to coincide with Wesley's moment of assumed vulnerability during a family celebration. Juniper's hands were trembling with the adrenaline of discovery and the weight of what she needed to communicate. Lorraine noticed immediately, her guardian instincts detecting distress even before understanding its source. "June? What's wrong?" "His pocket," Juniper whispered, her voice tight and urgent. "Right side, chrome device, active transmission, he's broadcasting everything." Lorraine's expression shifted through alarm to controlled focus in less than a second. She didn't question Juniper's assessment or demand additional confirmation. 8 months of living together had taught her that when the child identified threats with this level of certainty, immediate action was required rather than verification through additional observation. "You're sure?" "Positive. Saw it 3 times. Microphone head, antenna integration, active indicator light, professional-grade equipment, custom installation." Juniper's words came fast and precise. Technical vocabulary absorbed from Wesley's security briefings combined with her own observational certainty. "He keeps checking it, confirming transmission. We have minutes before he positions himself for optimal acoustic capture." The music swelled as the quartet hit a crescendo, and Juniper made her decision. She pulled away from Lorraine's hand and began moving through the crowd toward Wesley's position. Her small frame weaving between formal wear and champagne glasses, invisible in the way children often were at adult gatherings. The contractor was turning away from his column position, beginning his migration toward the bar area where multiple conversation clusters would provide rich intelligence. Time was running out. Juniper reached Wesley's side just as the contractor completed his turn toward the bar, his trajectory suggesting he planned to establish position within audio range of at least 4 separate conversation clusters where business discussions were happening beneath the cover of wedding celebration. She grabbed Wesley's hand with enough force to communicate genuine urgency rather than childish attention-seeking, her grip tight and insistent in ways that demanded immediate focus. He looked down, his expression shifting from host-appropriate warmth to sharp tactical assessment as he recognized the quality of tension in her small body. The jazz quartet launched into an up-tempo arrangement that filled the ballroom with energetic sound, brass and percussion creating acoustic complexity that temporarily elevated ambient noise levels by at least 15 decibels. Couples flooded the dance floor in response to the newlyweds' enthusiastic invitation, their movement and laughter adding additional layers of conversational noise that competed with the music. The resulting chaos was exactly the acoustic cover Juniper needed to communicate threat information, without broadcasting it to surrounding guests who might panic or react visibly. She stood on her toes, pulling Wesley down with insistent pressure on his hand, bringing his ear within range of her mouth. The music peaked with a trumpet solo that gave her perhaps 10 seconds of maximum coverage. She made those seconds count, her whisper urgent and absolutely certain. "Check his right pocket." Wesley's eyes found the contractor across the ballroom without visible searching, his tactical training allowing him to locate threats through peripheral awareness while maintaining casual host posture. The man in question was nearly at the bar now, accepting a champagne flute from the bartender with one hand, while his right hand drifted toward that interior pocket in the repetitive checking gesture that Juniper had catalogued 3 times already. Wesley's jaw tightened fractionally, the only visible tell that Juniper's warning had landed with devastating clarity. "You're certain?" Wesley's voice was pitched beneath the music, barely audible even to Juniper, who stood inches away. His eyes never left the contractor's position, tracking micro-movements and positioning with the systematic precision of someone calculating threat vectors and response options simultaneously. Juniper nodded once, sharp and absolute, no hesitation or equivocation in the gesture, chrome device sewn into the lining. Active transmission saw indicator light and antenna integration. "He's been checking it every 90 seconds since he approached your sister. Professional equipment, custom installation, broadcasting everything within acoustic range to recipients unknown." Wesley's expression didn't change to any observer more than 5 feet away, but Juniper felt the shift in his energy through their connected hands, recognition of genuine threat, triggering transition from social host to tactical operator. His free hand moved to his jacket pocket with the casual ease of someone checking a message during a wedding reception, fingers extracting his phone and executing a pattern Juniper recognized from previous high-stakes situations. 3 quick taps, followed by a specific swipe pattern that activated silent emergency protocols. The signal went out through Wesley's security network, without visible communication or disruption to the celebration's surface normalcy. 2 men in impeccable formal wear detached from their positions near the north and south entrances, their movement synchronized with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested extensive training and clear prior instruction for exactly this contingency. They began converging on the contractor's position, using trajectories that appeared natural to casual observation, one approaching from the bar's opposite end as though ordering a drink, the other circulating through the dance floor's periphery as though seeking a conversational partner. Juniper tracked both operatives' approach vectors while maintaining visual contact with the contractor, who remained focused on his chosen position near the bar where acoustics and proximity would capture multiple sensitive conversations. He accepted his champagne with practiced charm, turning to scan the crowd as though deciding whom to engage in conversation next. His right hand drifted toward that interior pocket again, the fourth confirmation Juniper had observed, the repetitive gesture of someone either deeply paranoid about equipment failure or following specific protocols for ensuring continuous transmission quality. The music shifted into a slower piece as the newlyweds transitioned from energetic celebration to a more romantic moment on the dance floor. The ambient noise level dropped slightly as guests paused their conversations to watch the couple's coordinated movement, creating a brief lull in acoustic chaos that made communication easier but also more visible. Juniper felt the timing pressure Wesley's security team needed to intercept the contractor before he established position and began capturing the post-dance conversations that would resume once attention shifted away from the newlyweds. Wesley's hand tightened fractionally around Juniper's fingers, acknowledgement and gratitude compressed into physical pressure that said more than words could have conveyed in this moment. Stay with Lorraine. If this escalates, she'll move you to the safe room. Trust her completely. I trust her, Juniper confirmed, her voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Will you stop him before he transmits more? Already stopped, Wesley said quietly, his eyes tracking his security team's converging approach. The signal he's sending is now hitting a localized jammer I activated when you gave me confirmation. Everything he's broadcasting from this moment forward is white noise, but he doesn't know that yet, which gives us tactical advantage for extraction and interrogation. Juniper's eyes widened fractionally. She hadn't known Wesley had counter-surveillance equipment positioned throughout the venue, hadn't realized the wedding reception was protected by active signal jamming capability that could be selectively activated. The sophistication of his security preparation was even more extensive than she'd understood. Layers of protection that operated invisibly until threats materialized and required response. The two operatives reached the contractor's position with deceptive casualness, their approach timed to coincide with his momentary distraction as he watched the newlyweds dance. The taller operative, Charles, Juniper recognized from previous security briefings, materialized at the contractor's right elbow with the friendly ease of an acquaintance renewing contact at a social event. "Mr. Cross," Charles said, his voice pitched for private conversation beneath the ambient music. "Mr. Cade requests a brief word regarding a potential business opportunity. Would you be willing to spare a few moments?" His hand gestured toward the private corridor that led to Wesley's prepared interrogation space, the movement suggesting polite invitation, while his positioning made clear that refusal wasn't actually among the available options. The contractor's smile remained perfectly calibrated, no visible alarm or recognition of compromised status disrupting his professional composure. He nodded agreement with the gracious cooperation of someone genuinely interested in business opportunities, rather than someone whose surveillance operation had just been detected and neutralized. Of course, always happy to discuss business with Mr. Cade. But Juniper caught the microtells beneath his controlled surface. The fractional pause before responding, the barely perceptible tension increase in his shoulders, the way his right hand started toward that pocket before catching the impulse and redirecting to adjusting his bow tie instead. The contractor knew something had shifted, some instinct warning him that his cover was compromised, even if he didn't yet understand how or when his operation had been exposed. The extraction happened with such smooth efficiency that most guests didn't notice the departure. One moment, the contractor was standing at the bar with champagne in hand. The next, he was walking alongside Charles and the second operative toward the private corridor, his body language suggesting willing participation in important business discussion rather than involuntary detainment for interrogation. Lorraine appeared at Juniper's side, her hand returning to the child's shoulder with grounding pressure that acknowledged the adrenaline and fear that came from identifying threats and taking decisive action under pressure. "You did exactly right, June. Perfect timing. Perfect communication, zero panic or visible alarm. That's how you keep people safe, not by being the loudest or most dramatic, but by being the most accurate when it matters most." Juniper leaned into Lorraine's side, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability now that the immediate threat had been contained and the contractor was being moved into Wesley's controlled interrogation environment. Around them, the wedding reception continued with music and celebration and champagne, the surface joy completely undisturbed by the security operation that had just unfolded with surgical precision beneath its cheerful chaos. 3 words had changed everything. Check his right pocket. Now they'd discover exactly what technology the contractor had brought into Wesley's celebration, and more importantly, who had sent him. The contractor walked between Charles and the second operative, Daniel. His name was Juniper, remembered from security briefings, with the easy cooperation of someone genuinely interested in business opportunities, rather than someone being extracted from a compromised surveillance operation. His smile remained warm, his stride confident but not resistant. his body language suggesting he considered this interruption a potential advantage rather than evidence his infiltration had been detected. Professional discipline or genuine ignorance of his exposed status, Juniper couldn't determine which from her position across the ballroom, but she filed the observation for later analysis. Wesley's expression showed nothing beyond host-appropriate attentiveness as he watched the extraction progress, his champagne flute raised in a brief gesture, acknowledging a guest's departure, before returning his attention to the newlyweds and their continued celebration. But Juniper had learned to read the microsignals beneath his controlled surface. The slight tension in his jaw suggesting controlled anger, the precise way he positioned his body to maintain sightlines to both the extraction corridor and potential secondary threats in the ballroom, the almost imperceptible shift in his weight distribution that suggested preparation for rapid tactical response. If the contractor's departure triggered backup protocols or revealed additional threats embedded among the guests, Charles guided the contractor through the archway leading to the venue's private meeting rooms with a hand that appeared to rest casually near the man's elbow, but actually positioned to control movement or block escape with minimal visible force. Daniel maintained position 3 steps behind and slightly to the left, textbook coverage preventing sudden reversal or aggressive action while appearing to any casual observer like normal processional spacing for men walking together through corridors. The choreography was so smooth that multiple guests saw them pass without registering anything unusual, their brains categorizing the departure as normal business interaction rather than security extraction. The corridor itself was part of Wesley's prepared defensive architecture cameras, providing overlapping coverage with no blind spots, reinforced doors that could lock remotely to create containment zones, acoustic dampening that prevented conversations from bleeding into adjacent spaces. Juniper had studied the venue's floor plans during security preparation and recognized that Charles was guiding the contractor toward the southeast meeting room, the one Wesley had specifically selected for interrogations, because it offered both soundproofing and technology integration for detection equipment and recording capability. The contractor's right hand drifted toward his interior pocket again as they walked, the repetitive checking gesture suggesting either paranoia about equipment functionality or specific protocols requiring periodic confirmation of continued transmission. Charles noticed the movement, his eyes tracking the contractor's hand position without visible reaction, but allowed the gesture to complete, rather than intervening. Smart protocol, Juniper thought. Let the target believe his operation remained uncompromised as long as possible. Gather behavioral data about checking frequency and equipment positioning. Use his confidence against him during interrogation, when revelation of detection would create maximum psychological impact. They reached the southeast room's entrance, and Charles opened the door with a gesture of polite invitation that disguised the fact that the contractor was now entering a space specifically designed to prevent departure without authorization. The lighting was deliberately calibrated bright enough to eliminate shadows, but not harsh enough to suggest interrogation rather than business discussion. The furniture was comfortable but positioned to provide Wesley tactical advantages. The contractor's designated chair faced away from the door and toward a wall-mounted display screen, limiting his awareness of anyone entering behind him while focusing his attention where Wesley wanted it directed. Daniel remained in the corridor maintaining perimeter security, while Charles guided the contractor to the designated seat with professional courtesy. Mr. Cade will join you momentarily. Can I offer you water, coffee, anything to make you comfortable while you wait? I'm fine, thank you. The contractor settled into the chair with easy confidence, crossing his legs casually and adjusting his jacket with the unconscious grooming gestures of someone completely comfortable in formal business settings. But Juniper, watching through the corridor's security feed on Wesley's phone, caught the micro-expression that flickered across the contractor's face during the half-second when Charles's back was turned. Calculation rather than comfort, assessment rather than ease. The man was analyzing his environment despite his relaxed posture, cataloging exits and threats and tactical disadvantages while performing surface calm. Charles exited the room and secured the door with a nearly imperceptible motion. The kind of door closure that seemed casual but actually activated electronic locks, requiring specific authorization to disengage. The contractor was now contained in a space designed to prevent escape and optimize interrogation effectiveness, though from his perspective it probably still appeared to be a simple business meeting room, where sensitive discussions could happen away from the reception's public chaos. Wesley watched the security feed for 3 more seconds, noting the contractor's repetitive pocket-checking gesture and the way his eyes scanned the room's architecture looking for security equipment or surveillance capability. Then he handed the phone to Lorraine with quiet instructions. Keep June here in the ballroom where she's safe and visible. If anything escalates, immediate evacuation to the primary safe room. No hesitation. No waiting for my authorization. Your judgment on her safety overrides all other considerations." Lorraine accepted the phone and the responsibility with a single nod, her expression communicating absolute commitment to Juniper's protection, regardless of what was about to unfold in that soundproofed interrogation room. Wesley's trust in her authority over his ward's safety was complete. He'd learned through 8 months of guardianship that Lorraine's protective instincts and tactical judgment were often superior to his own when it came to identifying threats to children specifically. Wesley crossed the ballroom with the measured pace of a host temporarily stepping away from celebration to handle business matters, his expression pleasant but focused in ways that discouraged social interception. He entered the private corridor and moved toward the southeast room where the contractor waited, his hand reaching into his jacket's interior pocket to extract a small device that Juniper recognized from previous security demonstrations. A specialized radio frequency scanner capable of detecting active transmissions and mapping their signal characteristics with precision that would provide evidence strong enough to break through even professional denial protocols. The door to the interrogation room opened and closed with smooth finality, and through the security feed now held by Lorraine, Juniper watched Wesley enter the contractor's field of vision with controlled authority that transformed the space's atmosphere from business discussion to something more serious. The real interrogation was about to begin, and the contractor still believed his surveillance operation remained undetected. That false confidence was about to become Wesley's greatest tactical advantage. Wesley entered the soundproofed room with the controlled ease of a man accustomed to conducting difficult conversations in spaces designed for uncomfortable truths, his presence filling the environment with authority that shifted the atmosphere from business courtesy to something far more serious. The contractor looked up with professional interest that appeared genuine, his smile calibrated perfectly for important meetings, his posture suggesting confident engagement rather than defensive wariness. But Wesley caught the microtells beneath that practiced surface. The fractional tension increase in the shoulders, the almost imperceptible repositioning that gave the contractor marginally better sightlines to the door, the way his breathing shifted from relaxed to controlled, suggesting conscious regulation of physiological stress responses. Wesley settled into the chair across from the contractor with deliberate casualness, placing the radio frequency scanner on the table between them, with the same ease he might have used for a phone or tablet, visible but not yet activated, present but not yet explained. The device was compact and professional-looking, matte black casing with minimal external indicators, the kind of specialized equipment that could be dismissed as ordinary technology by someone unfamiliar with surveillance detection capabilities. Wesley let it sit there for 3 seconds, watching the contractor's eyes track to the device and away again with studied disinterest that suggested he recognized it but was committed to maintaining his cover regardless. "Mr. Cross," Wesley began, his voice carrying warmth that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Thank you for taking time away from the celebration. I appreciate your flexibility with this unexpected conversation." "Of course, Mr. Cade. Always happy to discuss potential opportunities." The contractor's smile remained perfectly calibrated, his body language suggesting genuine openness to business discussions. "Though I'll admit some curiosity about the nature of this particular opportunity, given the timing and location. The timing is precisely why I wanted this conversation." Wesley's hand moved to the RF scanner, fingers resting on its surface without activating controls. "You arrived late to my sister's wedding, late enough to avoid standard security screening at the entrance, which is interesting given that you weren't on the approved guest list. That kind of timing suggests either extraordinary confidence or extraordinary desperation." The contractor's expression flickered, barely perceptible shift from confident engagement to careful assessment before resetting to professional curiosity. "I apologize if my arrival created any confusion. I received an invitation through a mutual associate who assured me my presence would be welcome." "Which associate?" Wesley's voice remained pleasant, conversational, giving no indication that he already knew this claim was fabrication designed to provide plausible justification for uninvited attendance. "Charles Holloway. He mentioned you'd been hoping to make contact regarding potential collaboration on some upcoming projects." The lie was delivered with perfect confidence, no vocal stress or micro-expression betraying deception. The contractor had clearly prepared multiple cover stories for various confrontation scenarios, each one designed to provide plausible explanation while maintaining operational security about his actual objectives. Wesley allowed the lie to sit in the air between them for 5 seconds, his silence creating pressure that most people found uncomfortable enough to fill with additional explanation or qualification. But the contractor maintained his confident smile, apparently willing to commit completely to his fabricated narrative, rather than showing doubt through nervous elaboration. Professional discipline or sociopathic comfort with deception, the distinction mattered less than the fact that gentle approaches weren't going to crack this man's practiced composure. "Charles Holloway has been dead for 3 years," Wesley said quietly, his tone remaining pleasant despite delivering information that shattered the contractor's cover story with surgical precision. "So unless you've developed some extraordinary communication capabilities with the deceased, that explanation is problematic." The contractor's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, the first genuine crack in his professional facade, before he recovered with impressive speed. "My mistake. I may have confused the name. It's been a busy week with multiple events and introductions." "I'm sure it has." Wesley's hand activated the RF scanner with a subtle press, the device powering up with a quiet electronic hum that filled the soundproofed room with ominous significance. "Let's try a different approach to this conversation. One that involves less creativity and more factual accuracy." The scanner's display came alive with technical readouts that meant little to untrained observers, but provided devastating evidence to anyone familiar with surveillance detection. Signal strength measurements, frequency analysis, and most damningly, a real-time graph showing active transmission originating from the contractor's immediate vicinity. The device immediately spiked into red zone indicators, confirming the presence of professional-grade broadcasting equipment operating at frequencies specifically designed to avoid casual detection while providing high-fidelity audio capture. Wesley rotated the scanner, so the contractor could see the display clearly, watching the man's face for micro-expressions that would reveal whether he understood the implications of the technical evidence now confronting him. "This device detects active radio frequency transmissions. Right now it's showing a strong signal originating from your person, broadcasting on frequencies commonly used for covert surveillance operations. Would you care to revise your explanation for attending my sister's wedding?" The contractor maintained his smile through visible effort, his confidence beginning to fracture beneath the weight of technical evidence that couldn't be explained away through clever storytelling. "I'm sure that's just interference from my phone or perhaps wireless earbuds. These devices can be quite sensitive to ordinary electronics. Your phone is in your left jacket pocket. Powered off, I watched you power it down when my security team approached you at the bar. And wireless earbuds don't broadcast. They receive." Wesley's voice remained conversational, but carried edges of something harder beneath the surface courtesy. "The signal this scanner is detecting is high-powered transmission, not passive electronics, and it's originating specifically from your right interior pocket, where my ward observed you checking a concealed device multiple times during your brief time at the reception." The mention of Juniper's observation caused the contractor's expression to shift again, surprise mixing with calculation, as he processed the fact that his surveillance operation had been detected not through technical countermeasures but through simple human observation of repeated checking behavior. The irony was evident. His professional-grade equipment and sophisticated infiltration had been compromised by a child noticing that he touched his pocket too frequently. "I don't know what you think you observed, but I can assure you," the contractor began, his denial prepared and practiced even as the RF scanner continued displaying evidence that contradicted every word. "You can assure me nothing," Wesley interrupted, his pleasant tone finally dropping away to reveal the controlled anger beneath. "You infiltrated my sister's wedding wearing active surveillance equipment. You've been broadcasting sensitive conversations to recipients unknown for the past 27 minutes. And you're currently sitting in a soundproofed room where your transmission is being jammed, meaning everything you've sent for the last 8 minutes has been white noise. So I'll ask one more time, with the strong suggestion that you consider honesty over additional fabrication. Who sent you? What were your instructions? And who's receiving your signal?" The contractor's professional composure cracked completely, his smile disappearing as he recognized that his operation was thoroughly compromised and denial was no longer a viable strategy. His right hand moved toward that interior pocket in reflexive checking gesture before catching himself, the aborted movement confirming everything Wesley had already concluded about the device's location and the contractor's awareness of its continued presence. The silence in the soundproofed room was absolute, broken only by the quiet electronic hum of the RF scanner and the barely audible sound of the contractor's breathing, shifting from controlled to stressed, as he calculated whether continued denial or strategic confession offered better odds of survival in this increasingly dangerous situation. Wesley waited, patient and absolutely certain that the technical evidence and confrontational pressure would eventually crack even professionally trained denial protocols. The scanner's display continued, showing the active transmission signal, its red zone indicators providing irrefutable proof that the contractor was exactly what Juniper had identified him as: a human surveillance device wearing a tuxedo, broadcasting Wesley's private celebration to enemies who would weaponize every word. The question was no longer whether the contractor would confess. The question was how much truth Wesley would need to extract before deciding what to do with the man who'd violated his sister's wedding. Wesley gave a single, sharp nod toward the door, the gesture precise and minimal but carrying absolute authority that required no verbal elaboration. Charles entered the soundproofed room within 3 seconds, his movements smooth and professional, bringing with him a metal case that he placed on the table with controlled care. The case was unmarked, matte black composite material that suggested either medical equipment or specialized tactical tools, deliberately ambiguous, in ways designed to increase psychological pressure through uncertainty about what it might contain and how it might be used. The contractor's eyes tracked to the case and away again, his breathing pattern shifting from stressed to actively fearful, as imagination filled the gap between unknown contents and potential applications. Wesley let the silence stretch for 10 seconds, allowing that fear to build and compound, using the contractor's own nervous speculation as weapon against his remaining composure. When Wesley finally spoke, his voice carried the quiet certainty of someone who'd extracted confessions from far more resistant subjects under far less accommodating circumstances. "We're going to conduct a simple search now. You have 2 options. Cooperate voluntarily and make this process quick and professional, or resist and make it slower and significantly less pleasant. Either way, we're finding what you're carrying in that right pocket. Your choice determines only the methodology and your remaining comfort level." The contractor's hands moved to his lap in unconscious protective gesture, his body language suggesting he was calculating odds of preventing search through physical resistance versus accepting inevitable discovery with minimal additional damage. His training apparently won over instinct. After 3 seconds of visible internal debate, he gave a single tight nod of consent, his jaw clenched with anger or fear or both. Charles moved with practiced efficiency, approaching from the contractor's right side with hands visible and movements telegraphed clearly to avoid triggering defensive reflexes. "Stand up slowly, hands at your sides, no sudden movements. We'll keep this professional if you keep it cooperative." The contractor stood with the careful control of someone managing both physical fear and professional humiliation. His earlier confidence completely evaporated beneath the reality of compromised operation and physical vulnerability. Charles conducted the search with methodical thoroughness, starting with outer pockets and working progressively inward, building psychological pressure through systematic approach that made the target pocket's eventual inspection feel inevitable, rather than sudden. When Charles's hand finally reached the right interior jacket pocket, the contractor's entire body went rigid, muscles tensing visibly beneath his tailored tuxedo as though bracing for physical impact rather than simple evidence discovery. Charles's fingers probed the pocket's lining with careful precision, locating the device through touch before extracting it with the gentle care of someone handling evidence that might be fragile or booby-trapped. The device emerged into the room's clinical lighting like a damning artifact, smaller than Charles's palm, sophisticated construction that spoke of serious funding and technical expertise, chrome casing with integrated antenna wire threaded through the contractor's jacket lining in ways that required custom tailoring rather than simple concealment. The microphone head was professional grade, designed for acoustic clarity in noisy environments. The transmission indicator showed active status green light still glowing, despite the fact that Wesley's jamming had been preventing any actual data from reaching its intended recipients for the past 12 minutes. Wesley accepted the device from Charles with hands that remained steady despite the anger evident in his expression, turning the sophisticated surveillance equipment slowly to examine its construction and features. "This is FSG-7 series, Chinese manufacture, diplomatic-grade surveillance technology not available through commercial channels. Requires significant connections and substantial funding to acquire. Which tells me your employers aren't street-level operators trying to gather intelligence on local territories. This is nation-state level equipment, or close enough to make no practical difference." The contractor said nothing, his jaw clenched, and his eyes tracking the device in Wesley's hands with the desperate attention of someone watching evidence of their professional failure being cataloged systematically. His right hand made an aborted gesture toward the pocket that had held the transmitter, checking for something that was no longer there, seeking reassurance through touch that was no longer possible. "The custom tailoring is particularly interesting," Wesley continued, his voice clinical and analytical. "This wasn't sewn in hastily before the event. This is permanent integration, meaning you either had this tuxedo specifically constructed to carry surveillance equipment, or you do this kind of operation frequently enough to justify maintaining wardrobe with built-in technical capabilities. Either way, you're not some desperate freelancer taking one-off contracts. You're a professional information broker, and someone paid you very well to infiltrate my sister's wedding. Wesley placed the device on the table between them, positioning it precisely in the contractor's line of sight so the green indicator light remained visible, still active, still attempting to transmit, completely unaware that its signal had been prevented from reaching any receivers for nearly a quarter of an hour. The psychological impact was deliberate. Visual evidence of operation failure, tangible proof that professional-grade equipment and sophisticated infiltration had been defeated through combination of Child's observational skills and Wesley's counter-surveillance preparation. Charles remained positioned behind the contractor, close enough to intervene if the man attempted sudden aggression, but far enough to avoid triggering defensive reflexes through excessive proximity. His hands were relaxed at his sides but positioned for rapid response, professional security posture that communicated controlled threat without visible aggression. Wesley leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from analytical to something harder and more personal. Here's what I know so far. You infiltrated my sister's private celebration wearing sophisticated surveillance equipment. You've been broadcasting sensitive conversations for at least 27 minutes before my ward identified you. You've lied repeatedly about your presence and your intentions. And you're carrying technology that suggests your employers have resources and connections that make them genuinely dangerous, rather than merely opportunistic. He paused, letting the accumulated evidence settle into comprehensive condemnation before continuing. Here's what I don't know yet. Who hired you? What specific intelligence they were seeking, and how much they've already obtained from tonight's transmission before we shut you down. Those are the questions you're going to answer now. Because the alternative is that I assume the worst-case scenario, nation-state level threat requiring nation-state level response, and you become evidence rather than witness. The contractor's professional composure was completely shattered now, his face pale, and his breathing rapid with the fear of someone recognizing they'd fundamentally miscalculated the risks and consequences of their operation. His eyes moved from the device on the table to Wesley's face to Charles's positioned presence behind him, calculating odds and finding no scenario that offered escape or even minimal mitigation of his current predicament. I want immunity, the contractor said finally, his voice rough with stress and defeated pride. Cooperation in exchange for guaranteed safety and freedom after I provide information. No retaliation, no punishment, no— You're in no position to negotiate terms, Wesley interrupted, his voice flat and absolute. You violated my family's private celebration with hostile intelligence gathering. You've endangered every person who attended this wedding by broadcasting their presence and conversations to enemies unknown. And you did it wearing equipment that suggests your employers would happily weaponize that information in ways that could get people killed. So no, you don't get immunity. What you get is the opportunity to provide information that might convince me your death isn't necessary to protect everyone you've compromised tonight. The contractor closed his eyes, his shoulders sagging with the recognition that he'd lost all leverage and all bargaining position. When he spoke again, his voice carried defeat rather than resistance. They'll kill me if I tell you. The people who hired me, they don't allow security breaches. I'll be dead within 72 hours of this conversation ending, regardless of what you do to me. Then you'd better hope the information you provide is valuable enough that I'm motivated to protect you from them, Wesley said, his expression suggesting that protection was possible but far from guaranteed. Because right now, your survival depends entirely on how useful you prove in the next 5 minutes. So start talking, Mr. Cross. Tell me everything about who sent you and what they wanted, and make it convincing, because my patience with deception ran out about the time we found spy equipment sewn into your formal wear. The contractor opened his eyes and looked at the device on the table, his operation's failure made tangible. His professional reputation destroyed, his survival now dependent on cooperation with the man he'd been paid to surveil. He took one shaking breath, then began speaking with the broken cadence of someone who'd just accepted that all possible outcomes were terrible and was simply choosing the least immediately fatal option. The confession was about to begin, and what it revealed would prove far more terrifying than simple espionage. The contractor's hands were shaking as he began to speak, his voice carrying the hollow quality of someone who'd just accepted that survival required complete disclosure regardless of the consequences. I don't know their real names. That's standard protocol for operations like this. Contractors only ever interface with intermediaries who use code designations and encrypted communications. But the organization is called the Meridian Collective. They specialize in information warfare, digital infrastructure penetration, and weaponization of data against high-value targets in criminal and political networks. Wesley's expression remained controlled, But Juniper, watching through the security feed Lorraine held, caught the micro-expression of recognition that flickered across his face before his features settled back into neutral assessment. The Meridian Collective wasn't unknown to him, she realized. This was a threat he'd been tracking or fearing, a name that carried weight and danger beyond ordinary rival operations. "Continue," Wesley said quietly, his voice giving nothing away about his internal reaction to the name. "What were your specific instructions for tonight?" "Full audio capture of all conversations within the venue's main reception area. Priority targeting on any discussions involving financial transactions, territorial arrangements, or political connections. Secondary priority on guest identification and relationship mapping, who talks to whom, what alliances appear active, what tensions exist beneath social courtesy." The contractor's words came faster now, as though speaking quickly might somehow make the confession less damaging. "I was told this was pure intelligence gathering. No kinetic operations planned, no immediate physical threat to anyone present, just information collection for future strategic planning." "Pure intelligence gathering," Wesley repeated, his tone suggesting he found that characterization deeply inadequate. "You infiltrated my sister's wedding wearing professional-grade surveillance equipment to broadcast sensitive conversations to an organization known for weaponizing information against targets' families, operations, and political connections. And you're characterizing that as somehow benign, because no one was supposed to get physically hurt tonight." "I'm not characterizing it as benign. I'm telling you what I was told and what I was paid to accomplish." The contractor's voice carried defensive anger beneath the fear. "My job was technical execution, not strategic planning. I provide surveillance capabilities. I don't control how clients use the intelligence I deliver. That's not my responsibility or my expertise." "Convenient moral detachment," Charles observed from his position behind the contractor, his voice carrying contempt. "You just broadcast conversations that could get people killed, but it's not your fault because you're just the technology specialist. Tell yourself whatever helps you sleep, but we're not buying that excuse." Wesley raised a hand slightly, silencing Charles's commentary without looking away from the contractor. "Who specifically within the Meridian Collective contracted you? I want designation codes, communication protocols, payment routing, everything that might help me trace back to whoever authorized this operation." "Code designation Alpha 79er. Communications came through encrypted channels using rotating server architecture. No way to trace origin beyond confirming they originated from Meridian's network infrastructure. Payment was cryptocurrency, routed through multiple tumbling services before conversion to cash. Standard operational security for this kind of work." The contractor was providing technical details with professional precision, as though demonstrating his expertise might somehow earn credit toward survival consideration. "And the device?" Wesley gestured to the surveillance equipment still visible on the table between them. "Who provided it? Who configured it? Who trained you on its operation?" "Meridian provided the equipment pre-configured. I received it through a dead drop in Brooklyn 3 days before your sister's wedding, along with the modified tuxedo and written instructions for positioning and operation protocols. The training was provided via encrypted video documentation, no face-to-face contact, no direct human interaction. Everything compartmentalized to prevent exactly this kind of interrogation from compromising the larger organizational structure." Wesley processed this information with visible calculation, his expression suggesting he was mapping operational architecture and identifying potential vulnerabilities in the Meridian Collective's methodology. "How long have you been working for them? Just this operation? Or ongoing relationship?" "Ongoing. I've done 7 contracts for Meridian over the past 18 months. Surveillance operations mostly, some counterintelligence work, 1 information extraction from a compromised network server. All high-value targets, all requiring professional discretion, all paying substantially better than market rates for comparable work." The contractor's voice carried the bitter recognition that listing his professional achievements was simultaneously demonstrating why he represented such a serious threat. "I'm one of maybe 6 contractors they use regularly for North American operations, which means they'll notice when you disappear or stop responding to communications." Wesley's observation was statement rather than question. "How long before your silence triggers their security protocols?" 48 hours. I'm supposed to file completion confirmation within 2 days of operation conclusion. If I miss that deadline, Meridian assumes I've been compromised and initiates cleanup protocols warning other active contractors, adjusting operational security, and usually arranging fatal accidents for anyone who might have been captured and turned." Wesley glanced at the surveillance device, its green indicator still glowing uselessly as it attempted to broadcast through the active jamming field. "How much did they hear before we shut you down?" What intelligence did you successfully transmit before my ward identified you? Maybe 15, 20 minutes of viable audio, enough to identify most guests by name, capture a few financial discussions near the bar area, document some political relationship dynamics between attendees. Not a complete intelligence package, but enough to provide Meridian with updated network mapping of your organization's current alliance's intentions. The contractor's expression suggested he understood this partial success made him more dangerous rather than less he delivered enough intelligence to damage Wesley's operation, but not enough to justify his own continued existence as bargaining chip. And the receiver? Wesley's voice carried new urgency. Where's the equipment capturing your transmission? Is it mobile? Stationary? What's its range and positioning? Mobile receiver in a vehicle, probably within quarter-mile radius of this venue. Standard protocol is to maintain close proximity for optimal signal quality while remaining inconspicuous enough to avoid detection. Meridian usually uses modified commercial vehicles, delivery vans, service trucks, something that can park near high-security locations without triggering suspicion. The contractor paused. But if your jamming activated 12 minutes ago, like you said, that receiver crew has already noticed signal loss. They'll be running diagnostics, trying to determine if it's equipment failure or active countermeasures. And if they conclude active countermeasures, they'll abort and withdraw to prevent capture. Wesley's jaw tightened fractionally, recognition that the window for intercepting the Meridian Collective's receiver team was closing rapidly as they recognized transmission failure and implemented their own security protocols. Charles, coordinate with Daniel to expand perimeter surveillance. I want identification of any vehicles matching contractor's description within quarter-mile radius. Priority on anything that's moved position in the last 15 minutes or shows signs of preparing for rapid departure. Charles moved toward the door with practiced efficiency, already pulling his phone to coordinate the expanded security sweep. The search would be complicated by the urban environment's natural vehicle density and the wedding venue's location in a mixed commercial residential district, where service vehicles and delivery trucks were unremarkable. But Wesley's team had experience with exactly this kind of counter-surveillance operation, and 15 minutes was still a viable window for interdiction if they moved fast and smart. Wesley returned his attention to the contractor, his expression carrying calculation about how much additional value could be extracted from this compromised asset versus how much he represented ongoing threat, requiring permanent neutralization. You said they'd kill you if they discovered you'd been turned. What makes you think I won't kill you for violating my family's celebration and endangering everyone present? Because I'm more valuable alive, the contractor said, his voice carrying desperate certainty. I have operational knowledge of Meridian's methods, contractor networks, technical capabilities. I can help you identify their vulnerabilities, predict their strategies, maybe even provide enough intelligence to compromise their network infrastructure if you're willing to invest resources in counter-operation. Dead, I'm just one eliminated threat. Alive and cooperative, I'm a weapon you can use against an organization that's clearly targeting you with sophisticated surveillance and information warfare. Or alive, you're a liability, who'll feed me disinformation while secretly maintaining contact with your employers through backup channels I haven't discovered yet. Wesley's voice carried skepticism that suggested he'd been betrayed by turned assets before and wasn't, inclined toward trust without extraordinary verification. Then verify everything I tell you. Cross-reference my information against what you already know. Test my claims through controlled operations. Keep me isolated and monitored until you're confident my cooperation is genuine. The contractor's hands were still shaking, but his voice had steadied with the focus of someone arguing for survival through demonstrating continued utility. I know I violated something personal by infiltrating your sister's wedding. I know that deserves punishment regardless of my employer's identity. But if you kill me now, all you accomplish is eliminating one contractor. If you keep me alive and use what I know, you might actually hurt the organization that sent me. That seems like better return on investment than simple revenge killing. Wesley stood, his movement deliberate and controlled, his presence filling the small room with authority that made the contractor shrink back into his chair, despite no overt threat being offered. You're right that you violated something personal. My sister's wedding should have been the safest place in this city because everyone knows family celebrations are off-limits under protocols that even rivals respect. But the Meridian Collective apparently doesn't honor those protocols, which tells me they're either exceptionally confident in their capabilities or exceptionally desperate to gather intelligence on my operations regardless of consequences. He picked up the surveillance device, turning it slowly in his hands as though examining artifact from archaeological dig rather than contemporary espionage equipment. This represents a fundamental shift in how threats operate against people like me. Traditional rivals I can predict, understand, negotiate with, or eliminate through established methods. But organization that wages war through information, that weaponizes data, and compromises digital infrastructure, that's different kind of threat, requiring different kind of response. Wesley's eyes fixed on the contractor with intensity that suggested he was making calculation about resource allocation versus risk mitigation. So here's what happens next. You remain in my custody under conditions that prevent any contact with your employers. You provide exhaustive debriefing about Meridian's methods, operations, personnel, and technical capabilities. You assist in identifying their receiver team and any other active surveillance operations targeting my organization. And if everything you tell me proves accurate and useful, I consider allowing you to survive this catastrophic professional failure. And if I provide everything you ask and it proves accurate? The contractor's voice carried desperate hope beneath continued fear. Then you live, but not freely. You become permanent asset under my control, providing counterintelligence expertise and technical surveillance capability for my operations rather than my enemies. You lose your independence and your previous life completely. But you keep breathing, which under current circumstances represents best possible outcome for someone who thought it was acceptable to spy on my family. The contractor closed his eyes, processing the terms that offered survival, but at the cost of everything that had defined his previous existence. When he opened them again, his expression carried resignation that suggested he recognized these terms were as generous as his situation allowed. I accept. Complete cooperation, exhaustive debriefing, permanent asset status in exchange for survival. What do you need from me first? Everything you know about finding that receiver vehicle before Meridian realizes their operation is compromised and disappears into infrastructure I can't penetrate. Wesley's voice carried new urgency. Because right now, that receiver team is our only direct line to an organization that just declared war by violating protocols that have kept families safe for 3 generations. And I need to send a message that war goes both directions. The contractor began speaking rapidly, providing technical details about receiver equipment, likely positioning, crew protocols, and vehicle characteristics. As he talked, Wesley's expression shifted from anger to something colder and more calculating, the face of someone who'd just been given operational intelligence that might allow him to strike back against threat he'd previously only been able to defend against. Outside the soundproofed room, the wedding celebration continued with music and champagne and laughter. But underneath that surface joy, Wesley's organization was mobilizing for conflict that had nothing to do with traditional territorial violence and everything to do with digital warfare where information was weapon and surveillance was battlefield. The Meridian Collective had just discovered that Wesley Cade wasn't merely a crime boss protecting territory. He was someone capable of learning, adapting, and striking back against threats that most traditional operators couldn't even recognize as dangerous. And they'd given him exactly the intelligence he needed to begin that counterattack. All because an 8-month ward named Juniper had noticed a man checking his pocket too many times. Wesley emerged from the soundproofed interrogation room 47 minutes after entering, his expression carrying the controlled intensity of someone who just extracted critical intelligence and was now calculating how to weaponize it before the window of opportunity closed. Charles waited in the corridor with updates from the perimeter surveillance teams, his tablet displaying multiple camera feeds and vehicle tracking data that had been compiled during the contractor's debriefing. Lorraine and Juniper remained in the ballroom's edge, where they could monitor both the continued celebration and the security feed from Wesley's phone. The child's dark eyes tracking multiple data streams simultaneously with hyper-aware focus that never quite relaxed even when immediate threats had been contained. We've identified 3 possible receiver vehicles within the target radius, Charles reported, keeping his voice low despite the corridor's relative privacy. All 3 match contractor's description of modified commercial vehicles. All 3 have moved position at least once in the last 20 minutes. And all 3 show occupants consistent with technical surveillance crews, rather than legitimate service personnel. Wesley studied the tablet's display, his eyes moving systematically across camera feeds, showing each vehicle from multiple angles. One was a white panel van with electrical contractor markings parked 2 blocks east, its occupants visible through partially tinted windows, as they worked with equipment that could have been either legitimate electrical testing gear or sophisticated signal reception technology. The second was a gray service truck with generic maintenance company logos positioned 3 blocks north, its rear doors slightly ajar in ways that suggested concealed observation of the wedding venue, rather than actual commercial deliveries. The third was a black SUV with government-style plates stationed 4 blocks south, its darkly tinted windows and low-profile positioning suggesting either undercover law enforcement or private security contractors conducting surveillance under official cover. "The SUV is most likely," Wesley said after 15 seconds of analysis. "The Meridian Collective operates with enough sophistication that they'd use official cover rather than obvious commercial vehicles that might draw attention in high-security neighborhoods. And those plates are authentic federal issue, which means either they've compromised government personnel or they have access to legitimate credentials through their network infrastructure penetration." Charles nodded agreement, already coordinating with the external security teams through encrypted text protocols. "Daniel's team is positioning for intercept approach from multiple vectors. What's the engagement protocol, observe and identify, or aggressive interdiction?" Interdiction. The moment they realize transmission has been terminated and the contractor isn't responding to their status check protocols, they'll withdraw and sanitize any evidence that could identify their personnel or link back to Meridian's command structure. "We have maybe 10-minute window before that recognition triggers their abort procedures." Wesley's voice carried the controlled urgency of someone operating on compressed timelines where hesitation meant failure. "I want that vehicle contained, occupants detained, and all equipment secured before they can execute data destruction protocols." Charles moved toward the exit with practiced efficiency, coordinating the intercept operation through rapid text exchanges with multiple teams. Within 90 seconds, Wesley's security personnel, dressed in civilian clothes that concealed their tactical capabilities, were converging on the black SUV from 3 different directions, their approach choreographed to arrive simultaneously and prevent any escape routes or warning time for the occupants to implement countermeasures. Wesley returned to the ballroom where the celebration continued with late evening energy, guests dancing and laughing and toasting the newlyweds with champagne and genuine joy that remained completely undisturbed by the security operation unfolding in the streets around them. His sister caught his eye across the dance floor and gave him a warm smile that suggested she remained blissfully unaware of the surveillance breach, the confrontation, the interrogation, and the imminent tactical intercept happening blocks away. Good. Family deserved protection that included protection from knowledge of how much danger constantly circled their celebrations. Juniper materialized at Wesley's side with the silent approach she'd perfected over 8 months of learning to move through his world without drawing attention. Her small hand found his, squeezing once with the particular pressure that communicated specific meaning in their established nonverbal language. Mission accomplished. Threat contained. Status confirmed. Wesley looked down at this child who'd saved his sister's wedding from intelligence compromise through nothing more than extraordinary observation and well-timed whisper, and felt something shift in his understanding of security architecture. Traditional protection focused on physical threats, guns, violence, territorial incursions. But Juniper had just demonstrated that modern threats required different capabilities. The ability to spot sophisticated technology through behavioral tells, the awareness to recognize when someone's presence violated unstated protocols, the courage to communicate warnings despite being a child in a room full of dangerous adults. She'd detected what his expensive security systems and trained personnel had missed, because she paid attention to patterns that machines and tactics couldn't track. "The vehicle teams are moving," Lorraine said quietly, holding Wesley's phone where the security feed showed multiple camera angles of the black SUV now surrounded by his operatives approaching from 3 directions. "Looks like clean interdiction approach, no visible alarm from occupants yet." Juniper watched the tactical operation unfold through the phone's display with intense focus, cataloging each movement and positioning choice with the analytical precision of someone studying chess masters playing championship matches. "They're good," she observed quietly, approaching from angles that minimize sightlines, using civilian traffic as cover, maintaining casual posture that doesn't trigger threat awareness until they're too close for effective countermeasures. Wesley felt pride mixed with concern at how naturally Juniper analyzed tactical operations, how easily she understood security mechanics that most adults never learned despite years of training. This child had survived through developing exactly these skills, and while they'd proven invaluable tonight, he worried about what it cost her to never stop assessing threats and calculating survival probabilities even during celebrations that should have felt safe. The phone's display showed the moment of contact. Wesley's operatives reaching the SUV simultaneously from 3 directions, weapons visible but not raised, body language communicating absolute authority, and 0 negotiation tolerance. The occupants, 2 men in professional attire working with sophisticated communications equipment visible through the partially open rear cargo area, went rigid with recognition that their surveillance operation had been compromised and surrounded. "Got them." Charles's text appeared on screen. 2 occupants, both cooperating with detention protocols. Equipment intact and actively broadcasting, were capturing whatever they've been receiving before shutting down to preserve evidence. Vehicle is clean government issue. Credentials check as authentic federal marshal service. These aren't amateurs. Wesley felt grim satisfaction at the confirmation. The Meridian Collective had indeed penetrated federal law enforcement infrastructure deeply enough to deploy surveillance teams under legitimate official cover, which meant their capability and reach exceeded even his worst-case operational assumptions. But that also meant capturing their personnel and equipment provided intelligence value that justified the risk of direct confrontation rather than merely defensive countermeasures. Bring them to the secondary facility, Wesley texted back. Full isolation, no communication access, interrogation protocols identical to what we used with contractor, and Charles, handle the equipment yourself. I want complete documentation of their technical capabilities before anyone else examines what they've built. The wedding celebration continued around them with music and dancing and the joyful chaos of family gathering, none of the guests aware that multiple interrogations and tactical intercepts were happening simultaneously while they enjoyed cake and champagne. Wesley had built his security architecture specifically to maintain this separation surface normality, protecting deeper operational reality. Family celebrations isolated from the constant warfare that defined his professional existence. Juniper released Wesley's hand and looked up at him with those dark, perceptive eyes that seemed to understand far more than any child should about danger and cost, and the price of maintaining safety through constant vigilance. The man you captured, the contractor, he said they'd kill him if they knew he talked to you. Will you protect him? Or is he just information source you'll dispose when he stops being useful? The question was direct enough to demand honesty despite its uncomfortable implications. Wesley considered several diplomatic answers before settling on truth, recognizing that Juniper deserved accuracy rather than comfortable fiction about how his world operated. I'll protect him as long as he remains useful and trustworthy. If either of those conditions stops being true, he becomes liability rather than asset. That's not kindness or cruelty. It's realistic assessment of resources and risks in environments where mercy often gets people killed. But I'm a liability sometimes too, Juniper said quietly. I require protection and resources and constant security monitoring. Does that mean when I stop being useful enough to justify the cost, I'll be disposed too? Wesley crouched down to her eye level, despite the ballroom's crowded environment, making this moment of vulnerability visible to anyone watching but judging the lesson more important than maintaining authoritative distance. You're not an asset or a liability, June. You're family. Different rules apply. The contractor is intelligence source who violated protocols and endangered people I care about. You're a child who needed protection and has proven herself invaluable not through transactional utility but through genuine trust and courage. Do you understand the difference? Juniper studied his face with the intense assessment she applied to everyone, looking for micro-expressions or behavioral tells that might suggest deception beneath reassuring words. Whatever she saw apparently satisfied her analysis because she gave a single small nod. I understand. But Wesley, what happens to the contractor matters for what happens to all of us. If you protect people only when they're useful, then eventually everyone becomes disposable when circumstances change. That's how organizations collapse from inside. The observation was uncomfortably perceptive coming from an 8-month ward, but Wesley recognized the truth in it. Building security architecture solely on transactional utility created system where loyalty was conditional and betrayal was inevitable when better offers emerged. The Meridian Collective probably operated on exactly those principles, which explained both their effectiveness and their eventual vulnerability to exactly the kind of counter-operation Wesley was now planning. You're right, Wesley acknowledged, the admission costing him something but earning Juniper's visible respect. So here's revised approach. The contractor gets protection and integration into our operations not just because he's useful, but because choosing to protect someone who violated our protocols demonstrates that rehabilitation and second chances are actually available. That might prevent future betrayals by showing people there's path besides death or disposal for those who make catastrophic mistakes. Lorraine, listening to this exchange with protective focus on Juniper's emotional state, gave Wesley an approving nod that suggested he'd just passed some test about values and leadership that she'd been monitoring throughout the evening's crisis. That's good strategic thinking and good ethics. Rare combination. The phone in Lorraine's hand displayed new text from Charles. Receiver team secured at secondary facility. Preliminary equipment examination shows they captured approximately 19 minutes of viable transmission before jamming activated. That's enough for basic network mapping, but not detailed intelligence on financial arrangements or operational planning. Damage appears contained within manageable parameters. Wesley straightened from his crouch, his expression carrying relief mixed with recognition that manageable damage was still damage requiring response and mitigation. 19 minutes of transmission meant the Meridian Collective now had updated information about his organization's current alliances, tensions, and vulnerabilities. They'd captured guest identities and relationship dynamics that could be weaponized for social engineering attacks or targeted pressure campaigns against key personnel. The intelligence wasn't catastrophic, but it provided exactly the kind of granular human network data that sophisticated adversaries could exploit through psychological operations rather than traditional violence. "We'll need to brief everyone who attended," Wesley said, thinking through the operational security implications. Not full disclosure about surveillance compromise that would create panic and damage trust, but targeted warnings about potential social engineering attempts, reminders about communication, security protocols, increased monitoring for unusual contact from unfamiliar parties. Frame it as routine security update following major social event rather than response to confirmed intelligence breach. Juniper was still watching him with that analytical focus, processing everything being discussed and constructing her own understanding of how security operations functioned at levels beyond immediate physical threat response. The Meridian Collective, what do they want? Why target your sister's wedding specifically, rather than directly attacking your business operations or territorial holdings? Because direct attacks can be defended against through traditional methods, security personnel, physical barriers, armed response. But information attacks are different. They penetrate through social interactions, technical infrastructure, human relationships. Wesley gestured toward the celebration around them. Tonight they gathered data about who attends my family celebrations, what alliances matter enough for people to show up publicly, what tensions exist beneath social courtesy. That information becomes weapon when they need to isolate me from allies, exploit relationship conflicts, or identify vulnerabilities through network mapping. So, surveillance is weapon, Juniper said, processing this framework for understanding the threat landscape. Not just information gathering for immediate tactical decisions, but long-term strategic preparation for future operations. Exactly. And that makes you... Wesley paused, recognizing the weight he was about to place on a child's shoulders. That makes your observational skills potentially the most valuable defense capability in my entire security architecture, because you spot the surveillance before it captures enough intelligence to be weaponized. You notice behavioral patterns that indicate concealed technology or infiltration attempts. Your counter-surveillance specialist operating through pure observation rather than technical equipment. Juniper absorbed this assessment with visible mixture of pride and concern, understanding both the value being attributed to her skills and the burden that came with being identified as critical security asset. "That means I become target," she observed quietly. "If the Meridian Collective understands I'm the one who detected their operation tonight, they'll prioritize either eliminating me or compromising my observational accuracy through disinformation or psychological warfare, which is why your protection protocols just escalated to the same level I maintain for my sister and other family members." Wesley's voice carried absolute certainty. "Enhanced security detail, counter-surveillance monitoring, complete information security about your movements and activities. You're no longer just ward under my protection. You're strategic asset requiring comprehensive defensive architecture." Lorraine's expression showed concern at this characterization, her protective instincts objecting to framework that reduced Juniper's personhood to strategic value. But before she could voice objection, Juniper spoke with calm acceptance that suggested she'd already processed and accommodated this reality. "I understand. Protection comes with cost of reduced autonomy and increased monitoring. But Wesley, I need you to promise me something in exchange for accepting those restrictions." "What do you need?" "Promise that when threats target me, you respond not just because I'm valuable asset, but because I'm person worth protecting regardless of operational utility. That distinction matters. It's what separates your organization from the Meridian Collective's approach of treating everyone as disposable information sources or expendable tools." Wesley looked at this child who'd somehow managed to articulate moral and strategic distinctions that most professional operators never fully understood, and felt something shift in his chest recognition. That Juniper represented not just security capability, but genuine conscience, asking him to be better than expedience and calculation typically allowed. "I promise," Wesley said, the words carrying weight of genuine commitment rather than strategic reassurance. "You're protected because you're family and person worth valuing, not just because your skills happen to be useful. And June, thank you for noticing the contractor, for trusting me enough to communicate the warning, for being brave enough to help protect people despite being child in a room full of dangerous adults. You saved this celebration and possibly saved lives by preventing intelligence compromise that could have been weaponized against everyone present. Juniper accepted the gratitude with small nod, then did something unexpected. She wrapped her arms around Wesley's waist in brief, fierce hug that communicated trust and connection beyond words. It lasted maybe 3 seconds before she pulled back. But in that moment, Wesley understood that he'd been given something more valuable than mere operational capability or security intelligence. He'd been trusted completely by someone who had every reason to withhold trust, who'd survived through hypervigilance and careful assessment of adult motivations, who'd learned to read micro-expressions and behavioral tells because assuming best of people had proven dangerous repeatedly. That trust was gift and responsibility in equal measure, obligation to prove himself worthy through consistent action rather than convenient words. The wedding celebration was winding down, guests beginning to depart with warm goodbyes and promises to gather again soon, none of them aware of the multiple crises that had been identified and resolved while they enjoyed champagne and dancing. Wesley's sister found him near the ballroom's entrance, her face glowing with happiness and exhaustion, and embraced him with genuine affection. "Thank you for tonight," she said quietly, "for hosting this celebration, for making everyone feel welcome and safe, for giving me one perfect day where I didn't have to think about the complicated world you navigate. It meant everything." Wesley returned the embrace with careful gentleness, knowing his sister remained deliberately ignorant of exactly how complicated tonight had actually been and how much work had gone into maintaining her perception of perfect celebration. "You're welcome. You deserve perfect days, and I'm sorry that my world makes those rare and difficult. Your world also makes them possible," she countered with the gentle wisdom that had made her Wesley's conscience when his own judgment became too calculated and cold. "The protection you provide, the resources you've built, the security architecture that lets us celebrate without constant fear, that all comes from the same place as the complications and dangers. I accept the complete package, not just the comfortable parts." They stood together for a moment in comfortable sibling connection, then his sister's attention shifted to Juniper and Lorraine nearby. "And thank you both for being here tonight. Lorraine, your work with the Foundation has changed so many lives. And June," she crouched down to the child's level with genuine warmth, "you looked beautiful tonight, and I saw you watching out for people all evening. That kind of attentiveness is a gift. Don't ever lose that awareness, even when it feels like burden." Juniper gave Wesley's sister a shy smile, the first genuinely relaxed expression she'd shown all evening. "Thank you for inviting me. The celebration was beautiful. And congratulations on your marriage. I hope it brings you joy and safety both." The phrasing was slightly formal, the kind of carefully constructed sentence that revealed Juniper's hyper-aware approach to social interaction, but Wesley's sister accepted it with grace and departed with her new husband toward their departing vehicle and the honeymoon that would provide brief escape from the complicated realities that defined their extended family's existence. Wesley, Lorraine, and Juniper remained in the emptying ballroom as final guests departed, and catering staff began the careful process of cleanup and restoration. Charles appeared at Wesley's side with final updates from the evening's multiple operations. The contractor secured and cooperative in interrogation facility, receiver team detained and equipment preserved for analysis, perimeter security sweep confirming no additional surveillance operations had been deployed as backup protocols. "We're clear for now," Charles concluded. "But the Meridian Collective will recognize operation failure when contractor and receiver team both fail to report status within expected windows. That gives us maybe 48 hours before they adjust operational security and deploy countermeasures that make follow-up operations significantly more difficult. Then we move fast," Wesley said, his tactical mind already constructing operational frameworks for exploiting the intelligence they'd captured. Full debrief of all detained personnel, comprehensive analysis of technical equipment to identify vulnerabilities in their network architecture, and targeted counter-operation designed to make Meridian understand that information warfare works both directions. They wanted to weaponize data about my organization, we're going to weaponize data about theirs. Juniper listened to this strategic planning with focused attention, absorbing lessons about how security operations scaled from immediate threat response to long-term strategic initiative. But when Wesley finally finished coordinating with Charles and turned his attention back to her, she asked a question that cut through tactical considerations to something more fundamental. "Tonight was success. We stopped the surveillance, captured the operators, protected your sister's celebration from being completely compromised. But Wesley, was it worth it? The constant vigilance, the multiple crises happening simultaneously, the fact that even family weddings become security operations requiring counterintelligence response. Is this how you want to live?" The question deserved honest answer, rather than defensive justification, so Wesley took a moment to actually consider what he wanted, versus what circumstances had constructed around him over years of accumulated choices and consequences. "No," he said finally. "This isn't how I want to live. I want family celebrations that actually feel safe, rather than requiring constant monitoring for threats. I want to trust people without constantly assessing their potential for betrayal or surveillance. I want to exist in a world where children like you don't need to develop hypervigilance and threat assessment skills just to survive." He paused. But wanting different life and being able to safely construct different life are different questions, and right now, dismantling security architecture that keeps people safe would create more danger than continuing to operate within it. "So you're trapped," Juniper observed. "Not by external threats exactly, but by responsibility for people who depend on your protection and resources. That's a different kind of cage than prison or geographic limitation." "It is. And June, I don't want you trapped the same way. Which is why Lorraine and I are committed to making sure you develop options and capabilities beyond just security operations. Education, artistic skills, social connections outside this world, everything that gives you choice about who you become, rather than just optimizing you for survival in dangerous environments." Juniper absorbed this promise with visible relief, her shoulders relaxing fractionally as she recognized that her value wasn't being reduced solely to operational utility, despite her demonstrated capabilities in that domain. "Thank you for understanding that I need to be more than just surveillance detector or threat assessment specialist, for wanting me to have different life even while needing my skills to help keep people safe right now." "You're welcome," Wesley said simply. Then he extended his hand, not pulling or commanding, just offering connection that Juniper could accept or refuse based on her own comfort and agency. "Come on, let's go home. Tonight was success, but it was also exhausting. You've earned rest and recovery time before the next crisis inevitably emerges." Juniper took his hand with trust that still felt profound despite 8 months of building relationship, and together with Lorraine, they walked out of the ballroom where Wesley's sister had celebrated her marriage, where the Meridian Collective had attempted sophisticated surveillance, where 8-month Ward's whispered warning had prevented intelligence compromise, and launched counter-operation that would define how Wesley's organization operated in evolving threat landscape. 3 words had changed everything. Check his right pocket. What they'd uncovered had indeed proved far more terrifying than simple physical threat or traditional territorial challenge. But they'd also discovered that protection required evolution beyond guns and physical barriers into realm of observational awareness, counter-surveillance capability, and willingness to adapt security architecture to match sophisticated adversaries who weaponized information rather than violence. And they'd learned that sometimes most valuable asset in entire security operation was child who noticed when someone checked their pocket too many times.